Crisis Center and in oh, we're being recorded. um, we at the Crisis Center and answering the 988 line, we're kind of generalists. We speak to anyone and everyone, but you may support kiddos in the work that you do. So there are some amazing youth-specific suicide prevention resources in these slides, which will be in your inbox after our session today. All right. So before we jump into this topic, I always put this caution sign up because I want to remind all of us to be gentle with ourselves and gentle with each other as we're entering this conversation. More likely than not, suicide has probably touched our lives in some way, shape, or form. I know for myself, that's what brought me into this work. My own experiences with suicidal ideation and losing loved ones to suicide. So, and I attend a lot of trainings with the Family Justice Institute, which is amazing. So I may have seen some of you guys there as an attendee, but sometimes with the heavy training topic afterward, you're like, oh, you feel it, right? So I want to encourage each of you during our hour today and beyond to care for yourselves. Be mindful of how you're feeling. And if you need to take a step away during our training session today, please do so. And please remember that the 988 line, while it's also there for us to refer people out to, it's also there for you as well. So if you're struggling, need someone to talk to, I know it can be hard to shift out of that helper role, but we gotta care for ourselves as well. So please feel free. That line is for you as well. Okay. Without further ado, we'll jump into the meat and potatoes of today. And I like to start with the language that we use when we discuss suicide. And often the first question that I get when I'm training new staff and new volunteers to answer the 988 line is, well, is it actually helpful to ask and talk about suicide with folks? And the answer is yes. I mean, anecdotally, I can hear it and feel it within our callers. It's kind of like venting the steam, releasing that energy, right? But we also want to be mindful of the way that we're talking about suicide because there are some terms that are used in everyday language in our culture that can be kind of stigmatizing towards suicide. One of those terms is commit suicide, which you hear often. It actually stems from a time when suicide was illegal. It was an illegal act in the United States some 60 plus years ago. So not that long ago. And there are still some countries throughout the world where if you attempt suicide, you could be criminally charged. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen in the United States anymore, but this term still exists from that time. And there's still that negative connotation attached to the word commit. Usually it's not a positive act that you're doing when you use the word commit, right? It's like commit a crime, commit adultery, commit a sin. And we want to remain as neutral as possible when we're talking about suicide. No judgment, at all, even seeping into the words that we use, right? So what's recommended to say instead is that individual died by suicide. It's just a fact of the matter. That's how they died. No feeling behind it. And kind of in that same vein of wanting to remain as neutral as possible, often when someone does die by suicide, you'll hear someone deem that suicide a successful suicide. But number one, it's obviously never a success when someone dies by suicide. And number two, it also introduces the concept of failure when it comes to suicide, right? If someone survives an attempt, they're like, I'm a failure at this too, right? I failed that. And we want to remain as neutral as possible, no feeling or judgment behind this topic. So what's recommended to say instead is that person completed suicide. They completed the action of suicide. I don't expect you guys after this hour together to rewire your brain pathways and be perfect at this going forward, but it's just something to be mindful of, especially if we're in helping roles. How are the words that we're using being perceived by the person that we're speaking to, right? And so I think that's just a good practice as a human to have, right? But some other terms to be mindful of in the suicide prevention world. A suicide loss survivor is an individual who's lost a loved one to suicide. We here at the Crisis Center offer a survivors after suicide loss support group for folks who are grieving the loss of a loved one due to suicide. And then a suicide attempt survivor is an individual who has attempted suicide and is still here with us today. And I know sometimes that just kind of comes up. Maybe suicide's not on the forefront of their brain in that moment, but it is a part of their mental health care journey. And they may want to talk about that, right? And what happened after that attempt. There's a lot of numbers on this screen, and there's no quiz, so don't be alarmed. But I like to provide a sense of a scope of suicide in the United States. And the latest data that we have from the CDC is from 2023. In 2023, 49,316 people died by suicide. Of those individuals, 79% were male and 21% were female. So that's a big disparity there. And we'll talk maybe a little bit more about why that is in a couple of slides. In 2023, youth, which the CDC deems as ages 15 to 24 years, 5,936 youth died by suicide. So overall in 2023, suicide was the 11th leading cause of death. And for youth, suicide was the second leading cause of death. But I want to take a moment and kind of expand that scope a little bit further, because obviously there are far more people who are affected by suicide than just those who die in a given year. And this infographic that you see on your screen was pulled from cdc.gov, and I'm patiently waiting for them to update it for 2023, but they haven't yet. But on the left-hand side in the box, it says over 49,000 people died by suicide in 2022. That works out to be about one death every 11 minutes. But why I like to highlight this infographic is the box on the right-hand side of the screen, which says many adults think about suicide or attempt suicide. 13.2 million adults seriously thought about suicide in the year of 2022, while 3.8 million adults made a plan for suicide, and 1.6 million adults attempted suicide. Why do I like to include this? Not only does it greatly expand the scope of people who are affected by suicide in a given year, but it also introduces the concept of the fact that the majority of people who have thoughts of suicide won't go on to make a plan and won't go on to attempt, which is really contrary to what I believed when I first started in this work, right? I didn't think that there was any gray area. I thought that someone was either completely safe or on the ledge, so to speak, right? But what we hear on the 988 line is that there are a lot of people who have these thoughts. They're almost like intrusive thoughts. They need a space to safely vent and brainstorm how to remain safe, and then they can go on with their lives. And that's why I really like to highlight this. And that's why we're here today, you and I, right, is to learn how to help someone stay safe in the midst of having thoughts of suicide. But before we get into that, we'll cover a few more data points here. For suicide attempts overall, there are estimated to be 27 attempts happening for every death by suicide. That doesn't mean everyone who attempts suicide or dies by suicide attempts 27 times beforehand. That just is how the CDC gets that data that we covered on that last infographic. They take the number of deaths, multiply it by roughly 27, and that's roughly how many attempts they estimate are happening in a given year. For youth, that number is far higher. It's estimated that there's 100 to 200 attempts happening for every death by suicide amongst youth, which can be absolutely terrifying if we have young ones in our life, right? But I always like to try to see the silver lining in that. That's more opportunity for that young person to be identified as needing more help and support and get connected to the care they need. For senior adults, it's estimated that there's 4 attempts happening for every death by suicide. So folks in the senior adult community are far more likely to die as a result of their attempt. And in fact, I mean, if you're all part of this Contra Costa community, and I know that you know the counties have been pushing senior mental health programs and youth as well. So we're doing our part in trying to prevent these suicide deaths here in Contra Costa County, and we're all a part of that, right? Moving into gender and gender identity, if you recall back a couple of slides ago, you remember there's a big disparity in the gender, where males are 3.9 times more likely to die by suicide than females are. However, females are making 3 times more suicide attempts than males are. So another sort of thing to kind of to ponder, because in a couple of slides we're going to cover some myths, and there's going to be an opportunity for you to discuss maybe why that is. LGBTQ youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide, and 40% of transgender adults report having attempted suicide at some point in their lifetime. So we know that folks within the LGBTQ plus community are disproportionately affected by suicide. And in fact, if you were to call 988, there's a phone tree when you call 988. If you press option 3, that'll connect you to the Trevor Project to get LGBTQ plus youth support specifically and be able to talk to other LGBTQ plus individuals. So please feel free to share that out, as that may feel a little bit safer for folks in this community. For survivors of suicide loss, it's estimated that for each suicide death, 6 survivors will experience a major life disruption, meaning that person who died was a part of their everyday lives. But it's estimated that for each suicide death, 135 people are quote unquote exposed, meaning that that person was just a part of their community, whether it be a workplace community, school community, whatever it may be. But as we know, that number could be far higher. I mean, some of these schools in Contra Costa are like thousands of students, and then the staff are also exposed. And why is that important? Often we do see suicide deaths occur in clusters, meaning that when one person dies by suicide in a community, it's far more likely that another person will also die by suicide within that same community shortly thereafter. And that's not me trying to say that that first death planted the idea in that second person's head, right? It's more likely that those thoughts were already there within that second individual, and they witnessed another, or they experienced and were exposed to that other suicide loss, and that gave them the maybe quote unquote courage to attempt in that moment, right? So that's why postvention is important. So what we're talking about today is prevention. We're trying to prevent suicide. Postvention is after a suicide loss, going into that community and preventing further loss within that same community. And we here have a postvention team, a mobile grief response team, who goes out into the community and supports the community when there's been suicide loss. Some more local statistics. In 2021, in Contra Costa County, there were 97 suicide deaths. But within our own call center for the fiscal year 2023 to 2024, we took 3,876 calls where the topic of suicide came up. And of those calls where someone was having thoughts of suicide themselves, we rate that individual low, moderate, or high risk. And in keeping with what we saw in that national data, the vast majority of folks who called in with thoughts of suicide themselves, we deemed to be at low risk, meaning that they had just thoughts of suicide, no plan, no intention of following through on those thoughts. The other big portion of calls that we get related to suicide on the 988 line are from third-party callers. Those are individuals who are calling in concerned about a friend, family member, or loved one, and asking, how can I help and support this individual? And we're happy to do that. I mean, that's another form of suicide prevention, right? And what do we do in that instance? We basically run them through this training of, gosh, what have you seen? Have you been able to talk to your family member or loved one and brainstorm with them on how they can kind of get them connected to care? Now, a big question we get from third party callers are would be, um, hey, can you call my friend? I'm worried about them. I think that they may be having thoughts of suicide. That is not something we will do. I can't imagine that that conversation would go well if we just called up someone cold turkey and we're like, "Hey, it's Caitlin from the 988 line. Your friend gave me your number." I can't imagine that that would feel great on the part of the individual we'd be calling. Um, but what we encourage third party callers to do is, hey, if you're maybe if you're in close proximity with this person, we could be on speakerphone and we could all three talk, or we could do a three-way call. We're happy to facilitate that conversation in that way, so you're not in over your head and you have some support, right? And we can kind of help guide the conversation, but we won't just cold turkey call someone. Um, yeah. All right. For suicide methods, the means most used. Far and above, we know that the most lethal means of attempting suicide would be by firearm. 55.4% of total suicides in the year 2023 were due to a firearm. Second would be suffocation or hanging at 24.4%. Third would be poisoning, like overdosing on medication, at 12.1%. Fourth would be falling at 2.6%, and any other means were lumped together at 5.6%. We always have to assume that suicide rates are underreported, misreported, or missed due to indirect means. So I know that there are some folks whose loved ones aren't counting that data for whatever reason, and I just want to give a quick voice to those individuals who aren't included in that data we just covered. All right, so I've been like talking at you for way too long, and I would love to hear from you guys. So what you see on your screen, or hopefully you see on your screen, are a list of myths surrounding suicide. And what I would like someone to do, the first victim, would be if someone would be willing to read the first bullet point aloud to us all, and maybe talk about why they think that bullet point is a myth or untrue. So would anyone be willing to go first? I won't call on anybody.
I got it. My name is Jennifer.
Thank you.
Asking or talking about suicide will give someone the idea to do it. I believe that's false. And again, I've had lived experience. I don't believe you can plant the seed in someone's head. They probably already thought about it. Just, just there. Hopefully it's just in the germination. I just have ideas. I'm not planning, but I'm just thinking about it. So I don't believe you can plant the seed. And I think it's good to reach out to that person, let them know, hey, I'm thinking about you. Let's talk. I'm here. How can I help you? What do you need?
Absolutely, Jennifer. You hit the nail on the head. Um, you know, talking or asking someone about suicide won't plant the idea in their head. I've never, in my experience in answering the 988 line, had that happen where someone I've never heard of it either, where someone was like, "Huh, you know what? Now that you ask, you got a good idea." No, no, the thoughts are either there or they're not. Um, and I see someone raise their hand. I don't want to mispronounce your name.
Oh, I'll read the second one if it's
Oh,
okay, or are we?
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. Help yourself.
People who attempt suicide want to die. There is nothing you can do.
Mhm.
And I think it's false. And there's something that we can all do to prevent that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this one, the first half is, well, the second half is kind of obvious, right? Like, I mean, that's why we're here. Obviously, if someone's, um, you know, reaching out for help and support or, attempting suicide, they need help and support, and that's why we're here. right? To learn how to be more helpful and supportive to folks within our community. The first half of that bullet point, people who attempt suicide want to die. Honestly, what we see within individuals who attempt suicide is that it's not the fact that death is the goal, it's the pain that they're experiencing to end, right? That's the goal. And it's almost like, the back's against the wall. I don't know how else things will get better. I don't see things ever getting better. And so that this is my solution, to get that pain to end. I see someone has their hand raised. Go ahead.
We have Rosa before
Yes.
that as well.
Yeah.
She asked to be able to share in the chat.
Oh, okay. Absolutely.
Okay. Hello. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
I'm Rosa Costa from Morada de Mujeres del Milenio. I'm glad here in this training meeting. Wonderful people to working together for the community. Yeah, I had to a little bit what happened with my best friend's son suicide. And then she was a very sad. She's very, very angry. And they say, oh my gosh, what happened? But his son, they look normal, living every day. And they say, why you not ask for help? And then the day he went to suicide, got at the gun, she called the police came, but he suicide. So it was terrible time because she is my best friend and her son was terrible time. So this is what I happen in my life.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry that that's such a devastating loss within your best friend's
Yeah.
family and for you as well. So thank you for sharing, Rosa. Our heart goes out to you and your friend as well. I saw some people had their hands raised and they disappeared. I lost you. But if you had your hand raised, please feel free.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was me. Yeah. I just wanted to say that, yeah, I don't think they want to die. I think they just want to escape the pain or whatever. It feels so overwhelming that they can't find any other way to escape it, right? So it's not necessarily the wanting to die part, but you can't find a way to come out of it.
Yes, absolutely. I see Cami, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to read the third one. Males
go ahead.
have the highest rate of suicidal behavior.
Mhm.
This one is tricky. I do believe that more men commit suicide, but I don't know what you mean by suicidal behavior, right? And so I do believe that women might experience like suicidal ideation, and I don't know what's the rate compared to men, but I do believe that men are more likely to achieve it just because it's so hard for them to ask for help, or within like the masculine box, it's so hard to find spaces or safe spaces for them to share being vulnerable or expressing suffering, just because it's expected of men to be strong and like all potent. And so I think that's the reason why, but I'm confused about the suicidal behavior piece of the myth. If you can like explain a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Cami, and you hit the nail on the head. And it's worded that way to try to trip you up. So you got it. So what we mean by suicidal behavior is more suicide attempts, right? So if we read it in that way, males have the highest rate of suicide attempts. We know that's untrue, right, from a couple of slides ago. However, Cami, you're absolutely right that males die by suicide at a higher rate than females do. And absolutely, when I have these conversations with folks, the culture of masculinity, that machismo, bravado, right? absolutely comes up of like, oh, I have to be strong, I have to be tough. There's less opportunity for some men to be able to connect about what they're going through on a real level, right? Than women do. There tends to be more opportunity, and it's more socially acceptable for a woman or a female presenting person to be emotional or go through mental health crises, right? Another thing that comes up in this, great disparity as well is how males versus how females are attempting suicide, right? So we often see men attempt suicide using the two most lethal means, whether it be a firearm or by hanging. And since those are more highly lethal methods of suicide, they're more likely to result in death. Whereas with females, we tend to see females attempt suicide either overdosing on medication or by cutting themselves, right? And so there tends to be a working up period with working up to that lethal dose or the lethal cut, right? And then that's also more opportunity for that person to be identified as needing help. So that's kind of why that rate disparity exists, is both of those reasons. So thank you, Cami. Would someone be brave enough to read the fourth bullet point for us? Oh, Denise, go ahead. Oh, Denise, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
Okay, you should ignore people who threaten or attempt suicide for attention. That is definitely a myth, I believe. I do have a child I work with, and she has thought of it many times, and I know it helps her to discuss it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we're in these circles, right, and we're all helpful individuals, and to hear those words of like, oh, you should threaten or you should ignore people who threaten or attempt suicide, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Like, I would never do that. But what this makes me think of is maybe a parent who's disciplining a child, right? And in that course of discipline, like, no, you can't go hang out with your friends. That child says something along the lines of, well, I'll just go kill myself then, or, something along those lines. That's pretty dramatic, of course, but it could happen, right? And the parent might just kind of blow it off saying, they're just trying to manipulate me or whatever it may be. And so our stance is to take any illusion, joke, or anything related to suicide seriously, because and it doesn't have to be like a whole sit down conversation or anything. But hey, what do you mean by that? Like, are you really having thoughts of suicide? And I want to make sure you're safe, right? And it may come back where the kiddo or young person is like, no. I just made a joke or something. And you could say, oh, okay, well, I just took a training, or I know that some folks are attempting suicide out there, and they do mean it. So just wanted to make sure that you're okay. So that's kind of our stance. Another kind of thing that comes up here as well. I don't know if anyone from STAND is here, but folks in domestic violence situations. I mean, it comes up a lot on the 988 line where a third-party caller, a survivor of domestic violence, calls in and says, my abuser, my former, romantic partner, is threatening suicide if I don't come back. And that's a sticky, tricky situation, right? And it's just kind of brainstorming with that individual of like, okay, to try to keep them as safe as possible, right? In that instance, because it shouldn't be them supporting this individual, and they certainly shouldn't return to that situation, right? And so what we do on the 988 line when this topic kind of comes up is, okay, are you in contact with any of their friends or family that they could kind of be supportive and helpful to this individual? And if not, perhaps just breaking that silence, and saying something along the lines of, I care about you and I don't want you to die by suicide. However, I can't be the person to support you in this moment, and I want you to reach out to the 988 line or whoever it may be, right? And that's sort of how we try to toe that line, because we want to take it seriously, but we also want that individual to remain safe, and not have to return to a harmful situation, at the cost of another individual, right? So, just some things to think about. um, all right, we're on the last bullet point. Would anyone be willing to read that one and discuss why that's a myth?
I'll go ahead and do that. It says suicide usually occurs without warning. I would say that's false too, but then I've heard stories that it can happen without warning. So, but
Mm-hmm.
usually people want, like, don't they want privacy
Mm-hmm.
to fulfill the, so
Yeah.
that was difficult. I mean, that was difficult to back it up because
Yeah.
your information is very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right on the money. Where usually suicide, there is a warning signs, right? And this is meant to be a nice segue into our next few slides here, where we talk about the signs, things to look for, things to listen for, and so on. But I know that there are individuals where a suicide loss comes as a complete shock. There were no warning signs that they picked up on, or maybe it was more clear after the fact. And that is exactly why we're here today, to be able to be more well-versed in the signs, and also feel empowered to ask, about thoughts of suicide if it ever comes up, right? And I'm also really passionate about providing this training because I think it's very true that some people are really good at masking in front of certain individuals, right? They would never let on that they're struggling in front of certain folks, right? But they may let that mask slip in front of somebody, and that's, and that somebody should have the knowledge and and feel empowered to, provide help and support to that person. And so that's why I'm passionate about the work we do here and the work that I do for our organization. So, with that being said, let me empower you all with the gift of knowledge, on things to look for, things to listen for, how to ask about thoughts of suicide, and then the following 3 steps for suicide prevention are express care, reach out, and follow up. So on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a trifold wallet card here, and this is actually an example of outreach materials you may have seen around the community, that I hand out at different outreach fairs and provide to community partners. So if you're interested in receiving some of these, please feel free to reach out to me. When we conclude today, I'll put my email in the chat, so we can connect further if need be. But without further ado, let's jump into the basics of suicide prevention. And it starts off with, what should we look out for within an individual that could point toward a suicidal crisis? Usually it looks like extreme hopelessness, withdrawing from loved ones, changes in mood or behavior. You've probably heard these all before, right? These are pretty indicative of someone going through, at the very least, a mental health crisis, but it could also point toward a suicidal crisis as well. But the one on this screen that is a run, don't walk, is the giving away prized belongings or making arrangements for, like their pets, their money. That really is a sign that someone is moving toward attempting suicide, and it's a huge red flag, right? That person needs to be connected to help and support. There was one instance on the 988 line where a third-party caller called in, and their friend had reached out to them. He had noticed that he was kind of withdrawing and very depressed recently, and his friend reached out and said, hey, if anything were to happen to me, you take care of my dog, right? I just want to make sure. And I was like, we need go over there. we need to check on this person, because that makes me really worried about that individual, that they're starting to seriously contemplate, okay, what can I do to ensure that the people and things I care about are still loved and cared for after I'm gone. There are some additional risk factors that increase the risk for having thoughts of suicide, just to be mindful of, right? In the communities and the individuals that we support. And I'm not trying to say that anyone with a mental health diagnosis will go on to have thoughts of suicide one day, but it certainly raises the risk, right? As well as having sort of impulsive or aggressive tendencies. If someone tends to be an impulsive person and they get that sudden impulse to, of suicidal thoughts, they may act on that impulse. Whereas someone who's more of a planner may be, more prone to planning it out. Having a history of trauma or abuse or alcohol or other substance abuse are a few other risk factors. Having previously attempted suicide at some point in their lifetime absolutely indicates that they are capable of attempting again. And family history of suicide. Interestingly enough, we do see that suicide runs in families, whether that's nature, nurture, or both. I could go on a whole other TED Talk about that, but we don't need to cover that today, but just something to be mindful of, right?
Caitlin, I'm sorry
yeah.
for the interruption. We have a
No,
bit
go
of a
ahead.
comment with a
Go ahead.
question from
Yes.
Edith in La Clínica.
Go ahead.
Specifically about young people and the role AI might be playing as an emotional outlet for teens. It's accessible, it's anonymous, and it's non-judgmental. Are we facing a new way that young people are seeking emotional support?
Ooh. I think that is true, that some folks and young people are reaching out to like ChatGPT for mental health support, though we don't recommend doing so. And that is because I've heard instances where AI can actually be harmful to individuals going through a mental health crisis. And so, yeah, that's not something we recommend doing on the 988 line. Just because, anyway. Now, there are times where some folks, especially when we're texting, that young people will think that we're AI, and we are very much real people. And I definitely I recommend using ChatGPT for other things, but not mental health or crisis support. But thank you. Feel free to put your questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand. I'm really bad at monitoring the chat, so thank you, Jose. And just feel free to interrupt me. All right, some additional risk factors. There's usually a catalyst for having thoughts of suicide, right? And one of the main catalysts could be experiencing some sort of loss, whether it be losing your job or finances, or some sort of relational or social loss, whether it be going through bereavement, grief, losing a loved one in that way to death, or a breakup. I mean, that's a big catalyst for folks calling into 988. Certainly, is going through a breakup. Having easy access to lethal means, of course, increases the risk, such as having a firearm in the home. A lack of social support and sense of isolation. There are two populations that this makes me think of. Of course, I think of our senior adult community, and I think of our disabled individuals who may be socially isolated, right? But something I noticed last summer that I hadn't noticed before was an increase of young people, school-age kids, reaching out for help and support during the summer months while school's on summer break. And that made me think back to my time in school. And yeah, I mean, 3 months without seeing your friends every day, and maybe home life isn't the best, could absolutely be isolating. and be risky, increase the risk. And so thank goodness I saw an increase in calls. So at least these young people are reaching out for help and support. And hopefully that continues to grow. Additional risk factors, non-suicidal self-injury, it's in the name. It's, they're not attempting suicide by engaging in self-harm, but it's definitely a risky behavior, as well as having low self-esteem. I'm going to push through these for the sake of time, as we're running quickly up to 11. So those are all things to look for, right? The next step is to listen, things to listen for. And believe it or not, even on the 988 line, most folks don't just come right out and say, I'm having thoughts of suicide, right? Because it's hard. It is hard to say those words. For some folks, it's a dirty little secret that they've been keeping hidden inside themselves for a long time. However, a lot of folks drop little clues, little hints that suicide may be on the forefront of their mind, right? Things like, I just can't go on. It'll all be over soon. I'd be better off dead. I wish I could just go to sleep and never wake up. Those are all things that I hear a lot in supporting folks on the 988 line. And they're all sort of red flags for me of like, oh, I wonder if this person's having thoughts of suicide. And how do we find out? We have to ask. And so that's the next step. But before we move on to the next step, I want to pause for a second on that bullet point that's, no one would care if I were gone, or something along those lines. I think there's an intrinsic kind of reaction within most people when we hear words like that, especially if we're hearing them from someone we deeply care about, to kind of want to almost argue with that person of like, well, I would care, and so would care, and you're wrong because all of these people would care about you. And it's said in a way that's meant to be helpful, right? But I would encourage you to hold back. If you hear those words, hold back on that instinct to immediately sort of point out why they're wrong, right? Because that just shuts down rapport with that person that you're talking to. It makes that person feel like they're not hearing me, So what would be recommended to say instead, or to do instead, is to reflect back on that. When I hear folks say those words on the 988 line, I say something along the lines of, gosh, I can hear how alone you feel. Or I'll just pair it back exactly what they said, like, wow, you feel that no one would care if you were gone. And that way they can sort of say, yeah. And I think the best gift that we're able to provide to people is a space to be able to express their pain and be comfortable with that. And that's exactly what we do here on the 988 line, is like, I'm your pain ShamWow. Let it out. I can handle it, right? Because there's not a lot of spaces in the normal world, with friends and family, certainly, where you can really express that life sucks, that you're experiencing immense pain, and be met with, yeah, tell me more about that. Because a lot of folks, I know, mothers, happy Mother's Day to all those out there, but moms want to fix, dads want to fix, loved ones want to fix. So try not to be a fixer to these folks you're supporting, right? Okay. So we've looked and we've listened to things. The next step is to ask. So certainly there's no sort of correct way to ask about thoughts of suicide, and we certainly on the 988 line don't follow any script or anything like that. But there's kind of a recommended way to ask about thoughts of suicide. You're asking about thoughts of suicide correctly if, number one, you're providing context for why you're asking. And number two, you're asking directly. So I'll just go to the next slide where I filled in the blanks so I can read it out.
Caitlin,
yes.
We have another question that came in.
Go ahead.
Right here about mental health assistance for people that are sick. and they just think about suicide because they can't,
Mm-hmm.
with their real pains like chemo or side effects. Are there any thoughts or comments on that from you?
That is very real. I mean, a lot of times we have that come up on the 988 line where, well, I see no hope for my future because I have this illness, or I'm reaching the end of my years, and I see no hope, right? And I think it just goes back to, obviously, we're in these helping roles because we want to be helpful to people and take away that pain. But I don't think there's ever, at least I don't have the tools to be able to make that change for that person. And so what I would recommend in those moments is to provide a space for that person to express their pain, and not offer any sort of solution, and just be a kind listening ear. Sometimes that's all we can do. Now, of course, there are, maybe if they're interested in attending therapy, maybe they could learn some tools to kind of help cope with that pain. And we certainly, one of the things that we recommend doing is creating a safety plan to kind of help cope with thoughts of suicide. That's one action step that you can take. Outside of that, there's not a huge solution. I see, Patricia, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Jose, for reading that, because the person who was asking about this, because that's something that it's impacting directly to my family. So my sister has cancer, but I mean, the side effects of her last chemo, I mean, are like, she's like totally devastated on bed since last month. But the problem is that, for example, everyone is saying like, oh, call Kaiser and get some, because anyway, she needs like mental healthness therapies, because also my niece is having issues with that. So, but everyone is saying like, oh, call Kaiser and get an appointment. But Kaiser, it's just providing like group sessions. But to be honest, in that group sessions, it's not like kind of support, because everyone is just sharing like, oh, I lost this for my cancer. But really, it's not like sitting with my sister or my niece saying like, hey, how are you feeling about this? It's just people sharing surgeries, and it's like the group class, it's not like the same one-on-one meeting. So that's why I was asking, like, if there's like some place to go or some resources to use and to refer her, like, hey, if you are feeling bad, you can reach out for this, maybe not for her pain, but at least like for my niece and for her, I don't know, maybe she feels better sharing this with someone else that it's not family, because she doesn't want to worry us. But I mean, that's something that I would like to know, because everyone is just referring her to Kaiser, and Kaiser, it's not a good resource for mental healthness.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia. And I'm so sorry to hear about your sister. I mean, that's such a tough situation for you and your entire family. So my heart goes out to
Thank
each
you.
and every one of you. And I think, what I'm hearing is that, she's kind of getting the runaround from Kaiser, which is not uncommon. I hear that a lot. And of course they want to offer these groups because, anyway, whatever. I won't get into all that. But if your sister or your niece ever needs someone to talk to, of course, the 988 line is available 24/7. I'm not sure how old your niece is, and maybe she might feel more comfortable texting. You can text 988 as well. And that is just an anonymous person, anonymous voice. You may never meet that person ever again. And, you're exactly right that, like, there are some things that you may not ever want to share with your family, some feelings, that you're feeling. You may not want to burden, right, your family with that pain. And so that's why the 988 line is there, to be that anonymous.
Caitlin, I just want to do a time check. We're coming up on 10:59. I'm sure that folks have a lot of questions. right? Whether it's situations like Patricia, where it's moments that we're living ourselves with our families, but also folks that are connecting with clients. What's the best way for folks to reach out to you to maybe follow up with those questions?
Yeah, let me stop sharing my screen, and let me put my email in the chat. I had promised I would do that, so thank you for the reminder, Jose.
You got it, Caitlin.
That's me. I put my email in the chat. I can also let me do this and go back to the first slide because it has my email there too. So if like taking a screenshot's easier for you, you could do that. Hold on just a second. Let me go back, find you guys again. There we go. And there's my email as well, CaitlinC@crisis-center.org.
Caitlin, thank you so much to all the folks that came in here. Yes, Kate, I definitely agree. This is easily a 90-minute session to be able to learn and connect with a lot of what's going on here. So again, thank you, Caitlin. Really appreciate you making and taking the time. As most of you have been with us in the past, there's a short survey that will be sent out to you just to help us evaluate the way our Family Justice Institute works, kind of some thoughts on how we can keep making it better. Since we were okay to share the slides, Caitlin said she'd be sharing those with us. And those could go over to myself, Caitlin, or to Marta, we were emailing you this morning. So you should have our contact details there, and we'll make sure to share that with you all. But again, Caitlin, thank you so much. And to everybody, again, thank you so much. You all have a great day, a great Friday. Happy Mother's Day weekend to all of those who are mamas. For those of us that still have mamas, and, you know, in memoriam for those of us whose mamas are no longer with us. Thank you all so much. You have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.